Thank you all for coming. Today we have Carlos Melian, who is coming from Switzerland, here in Utrecht for his sabbatical visit. And they will hear about the dynamics of feedbacks in non-equilibrium biodiversity organizational scale.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you for hosting me. Right, and the people organizing these sessions, also for having me here today, and also some people being here. So I'm starting my sabbatical, Utrecht, Biodiversity, theoretical biology and bioinformatics, Rutger, hosting me, thank you. And it's a hybrid sabbatical. There will be a period here and a period in Santa Fe, in Mexico. And I'm going to introduce you, this is a prototype. It's work we are doing here and there, nothing serious. Just, stop me. I think it's quite informal. I'm very happy to be here to discuss with many people working in biocomplexity from many angles. And I'm not really there, but we in the lab, we have been trying to approach, to connect different things. So if you feel it's a bit overwhelming or it's something grandiose, let me know, right? I mean, criticism is the way to go in science, right? Constructive feedback. So this is a teamwork, many people here in different countries. It's quite international. I am located in Switzerland, ETH, EABAC, working in mostly theoretical ecology. So this presentation is going to be online, so you can download and use it as you want. This is the list of references, not exhaustive. I'm going to kind of be through different stages in the talk. So where are we now? But are we now is not, it's just our lab, right? With all the limitations. And then I'm going to use briefly non-equilibrium, and then feedbacks, where are we going to go, where are we going to go in the lab, with all the feedback I expect to go in the sabbatical. And then biodiversity organizational scale is a bit too much jargon, but I would like to introduce what we understand by this. And then the road to dimensionality in biodiversity research. I'm going to also try to deliver some modeling we are doing, the equations, and it's all preliminary stuff, but it would be great if you have some critical feedback also there. So where are we now? This is a Dali drawing. Is essentially, we don't know where we are. We maybe see elephants, right, like that. And we are a bit really overwhelmed. It's a fascinating period to do science, right? I think it's so fascinating that I think most of you feel, right, where should we go, right, with all this data, approaches, methods, perspectives. Is the crisis of generalization. It's not easy to be a generalist these days. Because there is always this tension between, right, going deeper in one topic, but then when you go to many topics, you need to sacrifice some deepness. And this is the classical trade-off we are all in. And I think Dali here is representing that the giraffe is surprised, right? Because he's saying, wow, I never saw these elephants, right? So with, with birds' legs and, but this is part of the process of doing synthesis, right? You are in continuous crisis. So the hallmarks of any theory, right? Trying to summarize Dali's painting, is for me, it's these three elements, right? It's essentially the new theory succeeds wherever the old theory did. And then the new theory explains an observed phenomenon that the old theory couldn't account for. And then the third element is the new theory, in comparison with the old theory, makes different predictions. And then we can go out and test. I think these three elements, beyond the approach, are key, right, for developing theory. So non-equilibrium, I'm going to go kind of big here. I think most of you are aware of, I think, one of the main patterns, the macroecological patterns in ecology, is the latitudinal biodiversity gradient. Red is if you have many species, and then when you move to the poles, right, the number of species go down for many taxa. There are many exceptions. But I think that's very interesting, right, to start with the macro. Was this pattern always like that through evolutionary time, or has been changing? So there are many interesting data. One is this, I think most of you are aware, right? It's continental drift. I think it's fascinating. There are many data, global scale, where you can put many layers and understand biodiversity patterns at many spatiotemporal scales. This is one example. The pattern wasn't there millions of years ago for many taxa, dinosaurs, and many others with paleo data. And so when you change the conditions, mostly the landscape masses, the pattern is gone. And so maybe the pattern is just because today, right, the temperature, precipitation, the environmental factors, and the landscape masses, converge to have that pattern. But this was not the case through the history on Earth. So we'd like to understand, right, the non-equilibrium dynamics. We know, right, the Earth is a non-equilibrium system. These are the atmospheric rivers, brings most of the rain for dry areas, more than 50%. And if you take a look at most models in macroecology, in biodiversity, they even don't contain these elements, right? The fluctuating environments in contemporary time. So if we go to landscape masses, dynamics, continental drift, and many other dimensions, we are not there. And so we're quite limited, right, in the existing theory to predict microscopic biodiversity patterns. And so this is a brief introduction about non-equilibrium, right? So we don't have a good understanding in biodiversity how to take into account non-equilibrium dynamics. So feedbacks. Feedback is another interesting concept. Probably most of you work with feedbacks from different angles. And there are many interesting cartoons there. This one is essentially, right, Earth. You get energy, and then you get, the black in the center is the biotic activity, then the geochemical cycling, and then you get these arrows, right, with feedbacks here and there. Conceptually, we, I think, have a good understanding, but from the modeling, I think, for some feedbacks, and maybe for those of you reading about Gaia theory, right, from James Lovelock and different people, I think this is really something still quite incipient, even if this is all concepts. There are many models around this, but we don't have a good understanding of connecting feedbacks from the abiotic or biochemical dynamics cycles with biotic dynamics, with species, right? With populations, size structure populations, or populations containing many traits, right? Biotic traits, abiotic traits, mating traits. We don't have a good understanding of how feedbacks within and between species connect with environmental feedbacks and with niche construction. We have many modeling frameworks, most of them at the local scale, but here I am, representing, like, you have four species with 3 traits: the biotic, the abiotic, and the migration traits, which people call the BAM, classical use in biogeography. So all individuals have 3 traits, and then you have populations, and you have 4 in space, and then you have feedbacks between species, mostly coevolution, post-parasitic dynamics, or coevolutionary dynamics of many interacting species, and then you have biotic and abiotic feedbacks. So one of my main I think, dreams this sabbatical is to say, hey, how can we build a framework connecting biodiversity dynamics in non-equilibrium systems and feedbacks? Sounds quite grandiose, but I think we can start from first principles and build around these 2 main concepts, feedbacks and non-equilibrium dynamics. So where are we going to go? So if summarizing these 2 elements, one way to do it is essentially you have environmental conditions, you have, right, fluctuating dynamics, you can use data, right, from many local sites, and you can use also a number of traits, right? Again, for most people, I think, working in biodiversity, and also I think in population biology, I think we normally use, in most cases, 1 trait. Let's say the master trait. Can be body size, can be lifespan, which is great, captures many elements of individuals, but we don't have a more general framework to test how many dimensions, how many traits do we need for populations or many interacting populations to understand biodiversity. And so essentially, if you connect these two things, in nonequilibrium, right, dynamics, and then you kind of set up the trade space constraints, you can explore the evolution of specialization and generalization for many interacting species. This is a bit the framework we are aiming for. So if we go to equations, there are many frameworks there. This is maybe one. Probably most of you work in population genetics or quantitative genetics. You get it, right? It's maybe you have the covariance matrix, right, on the top. Essentially, right, is how traits correlate within populations for this biotic, abiotic, and migration trait. And then you have the fitness for each phenotype in time for a given site. So you have many sites. And essentially, you have stabilizing selection governing the dynamics, right? The closer you are to the mean type, right, the higher your fitness, and the more you are far from the mean type, your fitness goes down. It's quite the standard, right? The standard modeling framework for quantitative genetics. You can put this in matrix form, and essentially you can compute, right, the fitness of phenotypes within populations in space and time. But in here now we need to build on this. We need to grow and try to add non-equilibrium and feedbacks. And this is what we are aiming for. And all prototyping here, essentially imagine you have a multi-layer. Now I want to do the connection with all AI modeling framework. Most of them are essentially black boxes, even if there is this explainable AI modeling frameworks, right? Or physics-informed neural networks, biology-informed. There are many now models coming into play to connect mechanistic, right, multi-layer networks with neural networks. This is quickly evolving, all this field. So, but let's say you have genomes, right? Genes, you have traits, you have individual, population, species, and then you have essentially the top two macro ecological layers. And with this, you can essentially say, hey, how these things connect each other. You can do this, just multi-layer networks, right? Or AI, trying to understand, for example, the intra versus interlayer dynamics, just theory. And you can also explore this in the context of many feedbacks. So recurrent networks, you add feedbacks at the local, regional, and global scale, and you understand this is all things we are starting to do. And I expect to develop more here with all your feedback and critical feedback. So that intuition, I think, is there. And then you can explore essentially when you have strong connections between layers and you can collapse many layers, right? You can say, hey, only a few layers are really driving the dynamics. So it's a model complexity reduction dynamics. We can also go in that direction. And of course, you can also face reticulate networks, right, in multi-layer. So you have many intra-layer interactions stronger than inter-layer. So all these things, in the context of biodiversity, we don't have any idea how this multi-layer approach can help us to understand better biodiversity dynamics. One potential set of equations or framework is particle physics, or essentially here you have the dynamics of phenotypes in time and under non-equilibrium conditions, right? Essentially, is how phenotypes respond to fluctuating environments. You have three components in the equation, right? One is the how fitness of individuals change with environmental fluctuations. The second is going to be the mortality rate as a consequence of how far you are from your fitness optima. And the last component is essentially the social interactions. You can put first order, like mating, but also second order social interactions in the overall dynamics. These equations are challenging to run in spatial explicit landscapes. So then we enter in more challenging, and especially when you have many species and many traits. Any feedback would be great. We are here, playing, prototyping, equation-driven multi-layer approaches, and still many things are open. So how all these connect to biodiversity organizational scale? This is a bit jargon, but I think it's a jargon that tries to integrate people in doing science, right? I think if you come from discipline A, B, C, D, E, how can we put things together? I think from a neutral point of view, any angle, any perspective can be useful. Otherwise, why do we need such a large number of disciplines and subdisciplines? I think this is the way to right to conceptualize this term, and this is maybe a bit another piece of art. So it's how we connect these levels. So we start by A. Essentially, you have gene regulatory networks here, and then yeah, thank you. Then you have B like a each dot is an individual. You have a population of individuals. They are connected. This can be behavioral interactions, mating interactions. Then you have this population in a site. You have meta population. This A, B, C, D. It's maybe fields where people work and they. But the interface, the E, the F, right, the G, the H. These are the interface. These are complex things because we need to interact with different people, right? For example, E need A and B. And of F need B and C. And of course, you work in E and F, you need all these three levels, and it's going to be your whole life, probably. So I'm not saying we need to go there, but I'm trying to say that we have many challenges. And if you focus in D, essentially you are focusing food webs, right? Or ecological networks. And then the species is the entity, but you are missing all these other levels, and vice versa. So the point is how to tackle this trade-off, right? Toy versus complex or moralistic models to build theories in biodiversity connecting all these levels. So we're approaching some of these problems. You are gonna face now how bad we are in resynthesis because then we need to apply more the reductionism, right? So the introduction has been like grandiose. It helps, I think, to set up a context. But now we need to go to the numbers and to the equations and to the problems, right, of dimensionality and the number of parameters. And so most of you probably work in one of these: A, genes to phenotypes; B, phenotypes to fitness; C, fitness to biodiversity. And so here from A1 to A4, you have trait architecture, right? Essentially, when you have trait architecture, you can have two boundary architectures. You have gradients, like modular and correlated. These are maybe the two main frameworks. And modular is you have traits that are independent of each other. When you quantify traits in individuals, morphological, physiological, any type of trait, and you plot them in populations, you can see the correlations. That's it, right? How they correlate each other. And they can be, independent or correlated, pairwise. There are also three-wise higher order interactions, right, in trait architecture. But let's keep this simple. Then you have genes to traits. This is the pleiotropy matrix, right? Pleiotropy essentially to capture how genes act on different traits, right? The modular essentially is that you have gene by trait interactions. So in this context, you don't have one gene affecting different traits. And so this is important to connect pleiotropy with the P stages, right? During development or during the production of genotypes in your modeling framework, and then the expression vector, the regulatory dynamics. So the point is how to put these three things together, right? I mean, it's a bit overwhelming because each of these elements is a whole field. If any of you is reading about one of these topics, you can ask me many questions. I'm not going to respond because I don't know. This is the problem of, right? We need to get an abstraction here. And so you can have, these three elements to deal with complex traits, right? Traits that are not, like an infinite number of loci with a weak effect producing a specific trait value. So you have complex traits, you have nonlinear dynamics, or you have some genes producing, outliers in the trait values. So you have complex functions to go from the genotypes to the phenotypes. That the genotype-phenotype map. And so then you go to fitness, and essentially this is what ecology have been working a lot, right? Is how you connect these phenotypes to fitness. There are many ways. And then we enter here in complex selection modes, right? You can stabilizing selection, directional selection, you have fluctuating selection. There are many ways, many functions you can connect this element, right, with fitness. And there are no, unless you tell me, yes, there is only one framework to deal with that. There are many potential frameworks and equations. And then once you are here in fitness, you connect species fitness with biodiversity through demography, right? Birth and deaths locally, and then you have some spatial structure, and you can essentially compute the number of species interacting, right? The ecological network. So this seems easy, right? This seems easy. I mean, if we discuss this conceptually, the point is how to implement this and how to analyze this quantitatively, right? Analytically, and how to build robust approximations. So we call this the road to dimensionality. Ideally, I think we would dream if biodiversity can be explained with a few dimensions, right? That would be lovely. But I personally feel here is maybe a more philosophical that I started saying that I think we're in a fascinating moment because all this AI, you can see this from many angles, can be a bit disruptive in many, but from my side, I see this quite fascinating moment because it's an opportunity to develop theory further and to understand biodiversity, earth dynamics at the local, regional, and global scale. So it's an opportunity to understand the real dimensions. Think about that many of the algorithms working in AI, they have billions of parameters. Billions. And we are using 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, and we say 10 parameters is already complex. I think, I'm not saying I know how many dimensions. I'm saying that I'm extremely ignorant. This is essentially the Dalí painting, right? It's essentially, wow, we don't know yet how elephants look like. And so how many dimensions? Don't know. But this is an homage to people who have been working in genotype-to-phenotype maps, right, in complex traits. Is essentially you have 3 types here. This is modular, right? You have genes here, one layer, and then, this gene expressing specific traits within this individual and is in a population. Essentially, you have a subset of genes producing these traits and the other subset of genes producing these traits, and they're essentially evolution of modularity. This can be like traits responding to biotic, temperature, humidity, or abiotic or biotic, right? Like parasites or viruses, right? Immune system. Essentially, right? This can be evolution of modularity, right? And it's one interesting model. And the other boundary is correlated; they overlap. So you have potentially pleiotropy. You have interacting, right? Genes producing, and so you have more complex genomes and also phenomes with plasticity and regulatory processes. These are just 3 cartoons. We have many combinations here. The point is that this connects to the previous idea about biodiversity organizational scale, right? From the biocomplexity point of view. The point is how to add this to the context of fitness and population dynamics and biodiversity dynamics. Normally, what most people have been doing is you have like morphology, reproduction, territory, physiology, and then you classify it somehow, right? And you have like abiotic, right? You have biotic, you have migration traits. I always use as a reference the BAM in the context of ecology and biogeography. And so you have here 2 cartoons. One is trait integration. So you have, right, correlations between different traits. This can be positive, negative correlations. Here you have modularity, right? You have, each subset has a unique dynamics independent of the other dynamics. This, I think you realize already, is connected with dimensionality, right? Assuming dimensionality is the number of independent parameters in space and time, modularity contains more dimensions, but I'm not gonna go deeper there because I'm quite ignorant. So, but overall, you can simplify and go to fitness. Okay, we go maybe with the equations. I'm gonna pass through quickly. This is going to be all online. Any feedback, welcome. So essentially, we start with complex traits, the genotype-phenotype architecture. And one individual, essentially in space and time, for one species, individual I, species J, is you can produce a map, right? You can compute how the loci, right, the genome connect to the phenome, and this map essentially can be writing down at the matrix in the matrix form, right? So you have a set vector, which is the total number of traits of an individual in time and space, and essentially it's a function of the loci. And then you think that this in principle is a linear differential function, so it's something we can map. And then is the product of the pleiotropy times the regulatory vector, the expression vector. As a simple, right, you have a matrix, is the pleiotropy, is loci versus traits times, right, the vector of the expression vector. And this can be complicated a bit more when we add epistasis. That's it, right? So you essentially have, you can compute this. I mean, there are many ways, many functions, but as a general statement, you can compute the trait vector of individual I in time t and space x. You can say, hey, all the traits simplify to one, body size or a life stage, right? You can assume many reductions here, but the most complex situation is when this vector is very large. Can be, 100 dimensions, 200 dimensions, and then you, of course, are increasing also the number of loci, right, the number of traits. So the underlying matrices. And I think one of the most tricky things, at least for us, is how to compute fitness theoretically in the field is really challenging for many populations. For biotic traits, and then put these things together. And so you run the dynamics, assuming different architectures, modular, correlated, right? For biotic and abiotic traits, counting as independent elements for these two types of architectures, and then compare them, right? This is something you can do. This is one example to do it. Essentially, you can compute the distance, right, of the abiotic trait to its optimum. And the optimum, the zeta here can be a static environmental value or can be also fluctuating, can be a seasonal, sinusoidal functions. You can have even data-driven environmental fluctuations, but essentially you can compute the distance and then the fitness. And one interesting element here is the variance of the abiotic trait for that population. Right? We are assuming that the variance is an important element connecting the kind of the selection mode to neutral dynamics. Right? The larger the variance, the more neutral the system is. So the fitness is essentially being more equal among all individuals, regardless where you are with respect to the optimum. It's just an assumption. It's one of the functions. I think this is maybe the problem. I think I mentioned you go with the vision, but then you need to go to the numbers, and it's not easy to use general functions accounting for all the selection types, right, in complex environmental fluctuation settings. This is something I'm sure most of you have been thinking about these problems. But so with this framework, we can compute the fitness, right, for a given phenotype of a given in space and time for a given individual, given how far is to the environmental optimum. And so we can do the same for the biotic trait, right? We can compute, but now the biotic, you essentially have two individuals, right? And so, and you need some matching process there. There is also a mismatching process involved in many of the biotic interactions. But the main point here is that this function is again related to the variance, right, in the biotic trait for a given population in a given site. And the variance is going to be relaxing, right, or not, the how fast fitness decay when you depart from the optimum. And so you can essentially compute the strength of an interaction, right, between two species using this function. We're not going to go to the details, but essentially you can compute here for any interaction type. You can compute antagonistic, mutualistic, competitive interactions. And you can do that by parameterizing, by saying, hey, we have the community matrix from the data, from field data, and we know more or less how species are interacting. And so you use this as a parameter. This can be one way. Other way, just theoretically exploring this sign matrix and also the interaction coefficients. this is already quite complex to parameterize with field data, especially when you have a large number of species, right, and many sites. But the equations are there, and now the point is, okay, you have fitness for biotic, right, and abiotic environments, and so you can compute the total fitness of an individual, right, in space and time, and essentially, we add in the end a selection coefficient saying how much you penalize individuals, right, depending on where they are. This is essentially, so the idea of genotype-phenotype maps, right, biotic fitness, abiotic fitness, and obtaining the fitness in the context of a complex architecture. So now we can say, hey, we can explore the evolution of hierarchy, trait hierarchy, or the evolution of trait heterarchy. So heterarchy essentially is the diagonal here, right? Is when you have the black one, is when you have the variance of the abiotic, and the biotic is essentially 1-to-1. So then the fitness partition is equal between traits, and all the traits contribute equally to fitness. The evolution of heterarchies is quite interesting, I would say, because what we have in ecology is mostly essentially assumptions underlying the evolution of trait hierarchies. But if you don't have a strong test, you cannot test if there is a hierarchy or not. This is my critical point here. So you can compute the 1-to-1. You can simulate now the dynamics, in different, right, in different scenarios. Like the variance of the abiotic here is low, right, and the variance of the biotic is low. So you see where the different phenotypes are with respect to the optima, and you can compute the heat map essentially. So theoretically, you can do that, and just we have been doing many simulations in the context of two architectures. So essentially what we call magic, which is correlated. So all traits, essentially are just one macroscopic trait, but you can also run simulations under modular architecture. So essentially each trait is contributing independently to fitness. And you can say that the dynamics can be run as strong selection or weak selection. Weak is more neutral, it's essentially community drift. And the preliminary simulations, we will be, doing more severe, more exhaustive simulations during this sabbatical. This is just preliminary. Is that the more correlated the traits are within and between species, and the stronger the selection, the lower diversity you have in spatial landscapes. Essentially, the evolution of modularity, right? Here, you move in this gradient, the evolution of modularity, regardless if selection is weak or strong, is increasing the total number of coexisting species across space. This is quite preliminary, only brute force simulations. We don't have any analytical expectation here, but it sounds reasonable. Essentially, when you have independent responses to biotic and abiotic factors, right? At the population level, what you are is persisting more at the local site, and this produces the macroscopic level, the higher species diversity. And the more constraints, the more correlations you add, you are behaving well in the biotic, but not in the abiotic, because you essentially are increasing the constraints. I think for most of you working in different fields, it sounds quite reasonable as an expectation. So the take-home message, tend to narrow down the whole thing. So I think we have a severe gap in understanding non-equilibrium biodiversity dynamics, accounting for biotic and abiotic feedbacks at many spatiotemporal scales. It's a severe gap, is my feeling, because if you read the literature in ecology, most approaches are essentially equilibrium approaches at a steady state, but non-equilibrium, right, in fluctuating environments, we don't have good frameworks. And from physics, right, and many different fields, we can, approach these methods and learn a bit more about non-equilibrium dynamics when dealing with many species. And then the concepts of feedbacks. If you read through the literature, mostly in ecology, I would say also in evolution, in many subfields in the two, in ecology and evolution, I think feedbacks, there were many thinkers in the 50s, 60s thinking about feedbacks. in ecology and evolution. I mean, I'm not gonna say you names, but there are many, there were many. And don't know why it is becoming more and more challenging to think more about ecology in the sense of flows, feedbacks, and integrating many disciplines and understanding feedbacks, right, in between biotic and earth dynamics. I think we have a big gap here. And so where are we gonna go? Well, a first preliminary analysis I showed you is essentially connecting GPA, genotype-phenotype architecture, complex traits, with biotic and abiotic feedbacks and diversity patterns. The second and more, I think, maybe risky, is the road to dimensionality by integrating biodiversity organizational scale to feedbacks in fluctuating environments. This is essentially connecting toy models of biodiversity with AI, explainable AI modeling frameworks. And with this, yes, I really appreciate your curiosity in being here today. Thank you. Feedback will be great.
Can I ask, can you again explain to me, because you already said that it was a bit of a well, the terms are not always very clear. So what do you mean with biodiversity organizational scale? Because you tried to explain it, but it wasn't quite clear to me.
Well, but I agree with you, it's not clear, right? But it's essentially, so imagine a boundary here and say we have units, but the units are not within each level. But the units are units, you can set boundaries that connect the different levels, like the regulatory dynamics of complex traits, size, body size, or development is connected to some specific behavior in a population, and then this occurs in a specific part in the metapopulation, and then you're also in a specific part of the food web. Essentially, these units can be referred as biodiversity organizational scale. Now, the point is, do they exist? Don't have an idea. Maybe some of you have some light here. But this is one boundary. The other boundary is when we have A is a field and is completely independent of B, and B is a field and is completely independent of C. But I don't have the knowledge to say that. I'm quite ignorant here, but it's how we, because historical reasons, have set up the fields. But this is essentially one boundary is when A, B, C, D are fields. We don't know to go to the other levels because they are not bringing anything to make our theories better. But the other boundary is you need to take into account different levels in space and time to understand or to have better predictions or to predict what we are observing in the data. I don't know if this clarifies.
So I think I understand what you're trying to say with this picture, but I still don't know how it relates to the words in the phrase biodynamics organizational scale. Is that a particular scale, or are you asking a question about what are the relevant scales, or what was it like? I'm still a bit fuzzy about the terminology, I think.
I agree with you. Okay. I'm pretty fuzzy here. but I think we can set the boundary. We can say, hey, that is not biodiversity organizational scale. But from a humble point of view, we need to test. We need to test. I mean, from the scientific point of view, I'm not saying it doesn't exist without testing, because for me, this is not science. We need to test. We need, given the data or the amount of data coming from different fields and from different scales, how can we do this test? We can do brute force, but we can also build theories with explicit mechanisms, with simplifying, and we have some predictions and then assumptions, and we can improve. I know this is not helping you, but this is the way. Yeah.
Since you're choosing to represent this biodiversity organizational scale as a nested network, basically, are you using network theory to see if there are some characteristics of this network that are consistent?
In nested, you mean that, to see if I understand, this network here is a non-random subset of this network here,
Exactly.
or within?
Yeah.
Between?
Uh,
You see my?
Basically, A
Yes.
is a node of B.
Yes, and this can be a non-random, right? Because if this were random, essentially what we do is we sample this randomly, and this random subset belongs to an individual in B. This is non-nested, right? And when you say there is a non-random subset here that is inside B, this is what you are referring to somehow.
I think so, but what I was referring to is there are, so this would be basically a natural growing network, a very complex network. And I've read a very good paper that's a bit old by Barabasi, I believe, which is called The Emergence of Scaling in Random Networks. And I think it could be relevant because it's basically about how many networks that are naturally growing, such as river structures or anything else, have properties of being scale free, and so like some it doesn't matter what the resolution is of the network that you're looking at.
Yes.
But the structure is self-similar, basically.
So I had to read this, right? I had to go through this paper, what sounds quite interesting. But my question is were these just one scale networks, like bipartite networks, or many multi-layer networks?
I believe they use not multi-layer networks, so I'm not sure how to apply it to a multi-layer.
To a multi-layer.
Yes.
So, I mean, this is essentially, let's say this is a multi-layer, but the problem here is that the nodes in each layer, the network in each layer, it is not the full network in another level, in another layer, right? So you have this is the concept of nestedness, but it's also a bit more tricky because the networks here are particular of each individual. And the network here in this side is particular of this, right, of this node. Essentially, if we sample different nodes in the metapopulation, these networks are going to be probably different. For example, if this is a mating network, this can be a random mating network in one side, or can be strongly assortative in other side, or disassortative in other side.
Yeah.
You see the challenges we are facing because you have essentially many potential topologies, right? For each node, when you couple the different levels into So, but thank you. I will read this paper.
And also, you mentioned that there is a relationship between the variance of phenotypes and abiotic and biotic fitness.
Yes.
And it seems to me like it's related to entropy in some capacity, as in the moment in which you have much variance, you said, then there are more coexisting species.
And phenotypes, sorry, yes, within us,
then it seems that the entropy decreases because there is way more options. And so like the coexistence of more species, like it seems to me that it is related to a measure of entropy.
So entropy, why should it decrease? If I understand you, why? When you increase variance?
Because there is less information in the network when there is when there is a likely chance, the exact same chance. Imagine there is one node that connects to 4 others, and each of them is equally likely to be activated. Then the entropy is minimal.
But if I follow you, if you increase the variance within a population and all the phenotypes belonging to this large variance are equally abundant, right? The frequency is equal, then you are maximizing, right? Let's say entropy in the context of classical, physics. Is that what you are?
Yes, I'm referring to Shannon entropy.
Yes, exactly. So what we are assuming here is the larger the variance, the larger the number of phenotypes can coexist. And so selection is essentially at that side more relaxing because you are not killing phenotypes that are deviating from the optimum. They are essentially, maladaptive, but they are persisting in the local population.
I understand.
Well, okay, you are referring more or less to the same.
Yeah.
Always, Andre, sorry.
Thanks, Carlos, for your lecture. I have a question about this slide you showed where you said it went from traits to phenotypes to fitness, demography, biodiversity. This one. So in particular, why is demography basically to the right of fitness? Because I would say that fitness is a result of dynamics of the population. I mean, it's the survival of the fittest, which is always like comparing with other individuals. Here, it seems like you have a phenotype, and that basically nails down the fitness of an individual. And from that, you say, okay, we have demography, but isn't it reversed the levels of organization?
I agree. I think this comes from the modeling thing, right? That you need an algorithm and you need to compute fitness.
Well,
Right?
this goes right to the point of what is fitness.
Yes, exactly.
And many, there is a lot of confusion about it.
Yes.
It's something like the fact that I have brown eyes is a fitness. Well, I don't know. I don't think so. But it really depends on like what do you call fitness? And I think there is a lot to be discussed about
Yes.
fitness.
So how would you? So you'll have demography, right?
For me, fitness is invasion fitness. It's the fitness of a mutant in a resident environment. It's like an individual that is off, that is slightly different from the resident, and whether or not it can invade. And I think that is but that's my interpretation of fitness.
Yes.
But it can only be measured at a kind of population level. And that's what in ecology, of course, is the problem, because people like to attach fitness to an individual, ignoring its environment.
Yes. But how would you? So you essentially got anything wrong here? You are describing like fitness demography as a feedback with no time difference, right? It's essentially the same process somehow.
I don't understand what you mean with time difference.
So the
Fitness is a result of the dynamics of indeed a resident mutant interaction.
but that resident mutant contains an architecture, whatever an architecture, trait, genome, trait architecture, and now it's unique. It's unique.
Sure.
And contains some demographic parameters that is gonna make it invade or go to extinction somehow.
Exactly.
That is trait for.
That's trade, yeah, but its invasion success is dependent on the ecology in which it invades.
But you got anything wrong here because we are discussing here adaptive dynamics.
Right.
So
Yes, we do.
maybe we are going too much to the details, but let me. I think so. Yeah, we can put this in here in many frameworks, but just to be as clear as possible to help me understand what you are. So if ecology and evolution are completely decoupled, right? You go to one boundary, right? Essentially, these things occur really fast. Then maybe you can compute the survival probability of this mutant regardless the trait architecture, right? But if you have individuals that have complex developments with different traits acting to survive, I would say that this is, we can discuss this deeper, right? Is how, because this also entering the classical problem of eco-evolutionary feedbacks, right? I think for some of you, if have been working in eco-evo feedbacks, is can we compute these things as independent events, or do we have feedbacks during development that connect the ecological dynamics and the evolutionary dynamics? I think we have, this is an opportunity to do some synthesis there.
Right. No, it's true.
Yeah, that's something, but I agree with you.
But you make a choice here, and that's what I just want to bring up. Like, okay, I would put it the other way around. Like, okay, we have phenotype, we have demography, and fitness actually comes in the context of the demography. But that's.
Can I just briefly respond?
Yes.
Because I think in general, there's an interaction there between demography or ecology and fitness. And so I think you cannot draw an arrow from one to the other and not an arrow the other way around in general, right? So you're saying, for me, fitness is the result of the interaction of the mutant with the resident. Well, sometimes, yes, but it's also, you can also imagine at least models in which the resident has no influence whatsoever on the mutant's fitness, and it still invades or doesn't invade. So I don't think in general you need to compare to or you need to interact with a resident to define fitness in the first place. But it might
to have evolution, you need two types that interact with each other.
but fitness and selection and adaptation are three different concepts.
Yeah.
Okay.
But this is interesting indeed, right? For improving the approach, right? Is
Certain schools and
yes, is integrating the school. Sorry, we are delaying your question.
No, actually, well, I was.
Yeah.
Actually suggesting a similar thing, and but maybe to add to it, have you considered the impact of fluctuations on when you say, right, that you talk about fluctuations, but it's not in this particular model where there is some research. So I'm very ignorant in biology. I don't know much about it, but I have read about the fact that we only see high biodiversity in highly fluctuating environments. And Martin Scheffer and Vanja Lessing spoke here before on that topic. So I'm just curious if that's also a factor.
It's something, right? If we go here, here is the dream, right? Is here in the top, right? Temporarily fluctuating, right?
Yeah, I didn't see that. Yeah.
And so essentially, now the optimized fix in all these preliminary simulations. But the point is, okay, give me the data in a given site, right? You characterize amplitude and frequency or the time series, and then you add this to the dynamics and you compute the dynamics. But here we enter with this discussion, right? Previous discussion is what is fitness?
Well, then fitness is like a range almost, because it's constantly, your fitness constantly depends.
Exactly. It's
on that
fluctuating
particular
selections.
moment.
Exactly. Yes.
So it becomes a much more fluid thing.
We have been doing things in fluctuating selections. So when you have a stochastic, right, or seasonal, or you have fluctuating with different colors, fluctuating like red, you have white, you have the pink, and then you essentially compute fitness in this fluctuating. But as far as I know, with the connecting biotic and abiotic in fluctuating, I completely lost.
Okay.
In abiotic, it's easy, right? Because you compute fitness given where you are per time, right? Your phenotype, your abiotic trait connects to the environmental state, and you compute the fitness, whatever the function you use. The problem is how you connect that with the biotic, right? The biotic component. How you are interacting with other individuals, like mutualistically or cooperative interactions or antagonistic in a given environmental state. This is complex from the modeling framework. If any of you have some feedback, I would be really happy to discuss this. Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks for the talk. Very interesting. I really like this bigger picture idea, this unified sort of, you would say, theory. But then my question is, how do you plan to, let's say, fit this kind of models, whether it would be with simulations or data-driven, or maybe a mix of both?
Yeah, that's a great question. Here, inference is a whole field, right? Inference, a whole field about computing, the parameter using Bayesian or using classical, regressions, all AI, all this is there for inference. I think maybe your question, correct me if I'm wrong here, is how to infer mechanistic parameters. Because black boxes, right? There are many approaches where you can feed the data using black boxes, like multi-layer. You don't know what's going on, but you get a prediction. And so you're referring to mechanistic inference?
Yeah, well, that was the question. So the way I see it is either you do like more modeling side and you stitch them together and you see the emergence from that,
Yes,
or you do data driven and then you try to invert maybe the problem.
yeah, being pragmatic here, we are finishing, I think, right? But being pragmatic, imagine you have a plant community in a given, in a pond, and you have many morphological traits for, each individual many traits, and so you compute the covariance matrix. You can do that, more or less, right? Of course, if you have genomics, right, that would be amazing because then you have more complex data, but just to keep things simple, you have these covariance matrices, and so from this modeling framework, you can compute the different parameters that best match this observed covariance matrix. For example, this we didn't do this, but you can do that, I think, for many traits and for many species in a given community. But you have to, of course, deal with many gaps in the data, like biotic interactions. You don't know what, if you don't have biotic interactions, right, for this data, then you need to infer like black boxes, hidden, yeah. But we are trying to do something around these lines.
Interesting.